I got involved in a little conversation online, and it was about, I mean, basically there is an area in southern Iraq, right, at the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and it's called Eden. It has always been called Eden, and it is a swampy marshland, which is full of wildlife and game. It's it's an amazing place. And it was, until very recently, until about 25 years ago, it was populated by people who were known as the Marsh Arabs. The Marsh Arabs were not actually Arabs at all. They were the descendants of the ancient Sumerians and Akkadians who had populated that area and created one of the world's first civilizations, in fact, the first. Now, one of the things that you find interesting in discussions like that is that UScans are incapable of nuanced thought. They can't do it, and I don't know what that reason for that is. In this case, what happened was that I happened to back somebody up who said, well, Eden's a real place, and he had some images of it. And I said, yeah, it is. It's really well known that amongst historians we can trace the line. And it was, in fact, the root, it was the origin of the Eden story in the Bible. Right, in Genesis. Now, this is where you see how Americans think, US Americans anyway. One group of US Americans immediately attacked me because they said, well, you obviously believe the Bible. I went, no, how did you get that one? Because I read it doesn't mean I believe it, you absolute moron. But on the other, these are the what we might call the atheo-fascists, right? They cannot stand anyone saying anything that might suggest that anything at all in the Bible might be true. Now, the Bible, let's be clear, the Bible is not. It is not the Word of God. It is a collection of myths and fables, which are very interesting and do provide a great deal of information about our origins, but they're not literally true. I mean, seriously, get over yourself. So on the other hand, I have the religionards, the fundamentalist Christians, jumping on me for saying that, suggesting that in any way the Bible might not actually be the literal word of God. Well, I'm sorry, but if you're, only a 3-year-old believes that, please, you need a slightly more intelligence to get on with life. So what is Eden? Eden is this wild wilderness, but it's a nice wilderness. There's loads of fish, and there's loads of game, and basically the people who lived there, the Marsh Arabs, they essentially lived a hunter-gatherer lifestyle right up until the 1990s. And what happened was that Saddam Hussein, who was an evil bastard, and a really evil bastard, drained the swampland. He used engineers to do what nobody had been able to do before. Now, UNESCO has funded projects to try and re-establish the marshland, and it is coming back, but it's going to be many, many years because Iraq's completely goosed, thanks to George Bush and Tony Blair. Anyway, that's for another story. So, one of the interesting stories that comes from Eden, which you may not have heard of, but which happens to be within a study area of mine, is the story of Shamhat and Enkidu. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the pronunciation, but then neither is anybody else, right? So we're just going to go with that one. Shamhat was what's called a temple harlot. That means she was a priestess, but she also was in the business of providing sexual services. The Sumerians did not have the kind of prudish nature that Christians have. Anyhow, the king of a city called Uruk, which was the primal city of Sumer, was approached by a hunter who was very, very upset because he said, there's a wild man in Eden and he lives with the animals and he's been destroying my traps. He lets the animals out of my traps. I'm going to starve. I don't have any skins to sell. I don't have anything. I have no food. What are you going to do about it? And Gilgamesh kind of went, Gilgamesh was the king. What am I going to do about that? You know, he apparently couldn't just send an army. So he went to the high priestess of the temple to Inanna. Uruk was consecrated to Inanna the Great, goddess of fertility and war. And he asked the high priestess, he said, what am I going to do about this? And she said, well, I'll tell you what. She had a wee thinky, you know. And she said, well, I'll tell you what. I will arrange for one of my harlots, one of my temple priestesses, to go into Eden, right, and seduce this wild man, and then bring him back to the city. And then all the problems will go away because he'll be here. And Gilgamesh went, sure, sounds like a great idea to me. Presumably a little bit of some shekels crossed the palms, and this girl, Shamhat, came forward. Now, we're not entirely sure whether Shamhat was her title or her actual name, but we're just going to call her Shamhat, right? You'll find that, listen, these scholarly disputes happen all the bloody time, and it's just like, sometimes it's just, you can't resolve it, so just forget it, you know. There's no way you can actually go back in time to find out what the real answer is. So we'll call her Shamhat. Shamhat was 15. She just had her first period. She was incredibly lovely. She was of a beauty greater even than normal for Sumerian women. And Sumerian women were reputed for being gorgeous. So she was summoned by the high priestess, who said, look, you have to go into Eden, and it's all there, you know, the name is there in the tale, and find this guy. And Shamhat goes, yeah, and then? And the high priestess says, well, what you do is, while he's asleep, sneak up beside him, take off all your clothes and lie down beside him. And then when he wakes up, he will see you and he'll make love to you. And that way, you'll be able to capture him and bring him back to the city. So the young lady says, well, okay, fine. It's one of the funny things about the story. She just goes, yeah, okay. And off she goes into Eden. Apparently, the tale mentions nobody else, so we presume she went alone. And you have to understand that Eden was very close to the city. You know, there was cultivated land, which is where the Sumerians made their money, because they grew cash crops, particularly wheat and barley. But they also had this wild area, this wilderness, very close to the cities. So she probably didn't have to go very far, probably a day's walk, you know, at most, and she went into the wild country, the Eden, and started looking around. And eventually she found this place, this bower, beside a pond. And she realized this is where Enkidu slept. So she waited until he came home in the evening, and he lay down on the grass beside the pond. And when he went to sleep, she took off her clothes. There she is, stark naked, 15-year-old, gorgeous, lies down beside him. And of course, she wakes up in the morning, and there she is, no doubt making appropriate eyes and tinkling her lapis lazuli earrings. Guess what? So he immediately has her. He makes love to her. Not only that, they make love for a week. A whole week. Constant. At it. For a whole week. And then, in a pause in this passion, Enkidu goes, maybe I need to go and speak to my friends the animals. Because this is what he does. He lives with the animals. And that's a very interesting metaphor also. He lives with the animals, you know, in the wild country. And if you remember, if you're good in this, if you remember, that's what Adam used to do. Yeah, he did. And so Enkidu says, right, I'm going to have to go and tell him where I've been because he'll be worried. So off he goes, and he finds the animals, but to his horror, they smell Shamhat on him. And been making love for a week. It's not surprising. and they go, Christ, he's a man. He's not one of us at all. He's a man. And so they run away. And he runs after them, and they won't come back. That's it. They've gone. So he's absolutely, you know, he's demolished by this. He's absolutely, he's so upset. And he goes back presumably in floods of tears to the bower, and there's Shamhat, still naked. They don't mention any eating during this story. It's really interesting. Anyhow, there she is, and she says, "Oh, I'll comfort you, I'll comfort you." And so they make love for another week. So just think about that. That's another week. These Sumerians, I tell you, they were an earthy bunch. And so after the week, she says, "Look, you can't go back to the animals. They've rejected you. So why don't you come back with me to the city? And there you can be a friend of the king. You'll see things that you've never imagined, beauty you've never known. The place is full of girls like me. Absolutely full of them, and they're all gorgeous, and they're all absolutely willing. So why don't you do that? Why don't you just come back with me?" So Shamhat and Enkidu leave Eden and head back for Uruk. And if you haven't been struck by the similarity between that and the metaphor of the Garden of Eden in Genesis, then you need to start reading better, right? So they leave Eden, they head back to the city. And interesting, he wears her clothes. Because she goes, "Well, yeah, I'll need to put something on you, you're stark naked." So she gives him her robes. Now presumably she keeps some of them for herself, but he leaves Eden wearing the clothes of a woman. Right? That's important. He leaves Eden following her and wearing the clothes of a woman. Okay, so we've talked more about dominance hierarchies, but it's quite clear what's happening here. The woman has established her dominance over the man through sex. Do you want me to repeat that? Women establish dominance over men through sex. Right? Now, on their way back to the city, Shamhat and Enkidu encounter some shepherds. Now, shepherds are really important within Sumerian mythology because the city-based, the civilized, if you like, city-based element of Sumerian civilization was based on arable agriculture. That's the growing of cash crops, as I've said, wheat, barley, and they grew green crops as well. But the ones they made most of were the grain crops, because grain will keep. It can be sold. You can put it in bags or barrels, and you can flog it to people who don't have any. It is actually cash, all right? And this is what these cities had been built on, and Uruk wasn't the only one. It's just the best known. So shepherds, when they came along, they provide meat and skins, right? So that's really important, because you can't just live on grain, And okay, so they probably did continue to do some trapping and hunt when they could, but the shepherds provided this source of valuable meat and skin, but they also did something really important, which is they provided a seasonal labour force. If you're a country boy like me, then you'll know that there are certain parts of the year where, it's like crazy. You've got to work because you've got to get the harvest in, right? And then you need lots and lots and lots of people. And most of the year you don't really need so many at all. So having a seasonal labour force is really useful. And certainly in Britain, until very recently, these were, they used to use school kids when I was at school, right? Get the kids, they can pick the berries, they can pick up the potatoes, then they go back to school. So you have this seasonal labour force, which was absolutely essential in this kind of society. So that's why the shepherds are there. They're important. And you'll remember, because Jesus was a shepherd, that this kicks forward, Anyway, Shamhat speaks to the shepherds, and she's a temple harlot. So she's a senior person. She's a person of authority. She is a priestess of the great temple. Right? You don't argue with these people. I mean, they might put some fucking hex on you or something, I don't know. But she says to them, "Look, we need some clothes and some food." So they give some food. It's the first time food is mentioned in this story. So they give them some food. The shepherds give the Shamhat and Enkidu some food, and she says, "Can you give him some clothes that befit a man, so that we can enter the city with him as a man?" It's very interesting. So he takes off her robes, which presumably just the outer ones because she wasn't walking around naked, and puts on guy clothes, dressed as a shepherd. That's important. And then they go into Uruk, and Enkidu is formally introduced to both the temple, the high priestess of the temple, and to the king Gilgamesh, and becomes Gilgamesh's friend. Although they fight, that's another story. We can come to that one. But the similarities between this story of Eden and the Garden of Eden in Genesis are so close that you cannot reasonably suggest that they are not the same story. Enkidu is a well man. He lives with the animals, which is what Adam does. Now, this is an interesting metaphor, because in the early days of cities, it was really important that they got as many men to come to the city and work as they could. And it has been postulated by certain people, including my good self, that one of the reasons that temple prostitution existed was that it encouraged men to come to the city. And then they would come and they would earn money working in the fields and get the crops tended to. So it was like, a quid pro quo. We've got sex here for you if you'll only come and be part of our system. You see? So Enkidu, his mates in Eden, we're told that they're the animals, but animals are all, that's something you call uncivilized men. Oh, they're animals. You call men who don't know how to behave animals. And this is really, I think, this is my personal opinion, I think this is the meaning of that part of the story, is that they weren't actually four-legged animals. They were other men who were living in Eden, and they didn't come to the city. They were men and boys who lived outside the city. And it says in the story that Enkidu had sex with the animals. No, it wasn't bestiality. He was having sex with the boys. Because, in the ancient world, and in fact, really, up until only a very short period of time ago, that was completely normal. That was fine. You've got a cute boy there, come on, get him off. So the point of that metaphor is that this was a group of men who didn't need women. Or maybe they didn't realize they needed women. They certainly didn't have any women. They were all male. Shamhat came in and she broke that. She said, no, look what I can do. I've got to look at the boobs. Look down there, look what I got. Yeah, you never seen one of those before, have you? And she seduced Enkidu. And in so doing, she metaphorically seduced all men into slavery for the city, for the temple, and for Uruk. Do you get this? Now, Enkidu's name is interesting. Shamhat we're not really sure about. It could be her personal name, or it could be possibly be a sort of corruption of a title of some kind. So what she was technically in Sumerian, she was a harem tu, or harem su. And that suggests that she was part of the harem. Right? The harem actually started long before the Arabs started. So the harem was actually the cohort of temple priestesses. So harem too just means, she was one of them. Enkidu's name is interesting because Enki, right, is the name of that's the office really, of one of the most senior gods in the pantheon. His name is Ea, E-A. And that crops up everywhere. His title is Enki, and he is Lord of Wisdom and Craft and Sweet Water, that is fresh water. Okay, so this is a really, really, really powerful god, I mean, this god was actually created by the very first goddess, right? Directly, See, he's one of the most senior gods there are. So Enkidu, du is a masculine Akkadian suffix. So it sounds a bit like Enkidu is Enki's man, Enki's guy, Enki's follower. And again, that fits very well with the notion of Adam you know, as being the Son of God, the first Son of God, because he obviously had another one later. But I mean, there's no way you can actually read Genesis and not realize that Adam is actually the Son of God. I mean, come on, he's created by God, for goodness sake. Get real. So it's very, very interesting. I find this fascinating stuff, you know, and I could, if you like it, I can do a lot more, because I've spent years studying this. I mean, you think I study sexology? I don't. That's a passing hobby. I'm mainly you know, an art historian. That's what I do. So, leaving that to one side, this story links so well with the ideas expressed in the Genesis version of the Garden of Eden, sometimes called the Fall, that it's really hard to not see the connection, especially when we do know that there was actual physical continuity between Sumer and Assyria, and later Israel. Okay, we know that people moved from Sumer because it became a very violent place. It became war torn. In fact, Abraham, you remember Abraham from the Bible, he was born and grew up and was a very prominent fellow in a city called Ur, which was later called Ur of the Chaldeans, and it's known as that in the Bible. Now, Ur is in Sumeria. So he took Sumerian culture with him because he wanted to escape war, which is quite reasonable. I mean, war in those days was just as brutal as what you see in the Middle East today. It was vicious. Nobody was spared. So Abraham quite rightly took his family and said, to hell with this, we're going, you know. But they took the culture with them. You know, they took these ideas and stories that they'd grown up listening to, they went too. And that's almost certainly how the story of Enkidu and Shamhat ended up as the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis. What about that, hey? Now, you don't need to believe in Christian gods or Jewish gods or anything to understand that mythology. Myths are not meant to be literally true, but they are incredibly valuable for setting context. And in terms of history and archaeology, knowing the mythology that these ideas are applicant to becomes really, really important, you know, because if you've just got some stuff that you've dug up, then you go, yeah, but well, what's the meaning? Well, what's the connotation? You know, and it's at one point, in particularly in the West, because we were the first to find these things, people just used to make it up. And because, you know, Greece was the first ancient culture that was considered by the modern West, you know, Middle Ages or Renaissance, everybody thought that all these cultures were like Greece. Well, they weren't. They weren't. Sumeria predated Greece by thousands of years. And it was, you know, very different. I mean, if there is a cultural exchange, it goes from Sumeria to Greece via Arcadia and Assyria, you know, that kind of thing. It doesn't go the other way, right? So previously, people were a bit sloppy about the end of this thing because, you know, ethnography was in its infancy. But now people take a very great care to try to find out, you know, what an actual objective understanding of the culture might be. And for that, you do need to know its mythology, or it helps enormously if you know its mythology. It's like, well, I can actually take these bits of story and I can connect them to artifacts that I find. I mean, there are no living Sumerians to tell you. I mean, even if there were, even the Marsh Arabs were their descendants. Saddam Hussein got rid of all of them. He was an evil bastard, he really was. You can't, and there's no way of time travel, so you've just got to use all of these fragments and try and put together what it might have been like. And actually what it might have been like was the Uruk and the other Sumerian cities, the great ones like Ur, there were maybe 10 powerful cities in Sumer. They had wonderful lives. If you weren't a slave, and they did have slaves, if you weren't a slave, Oh, God, what a place to live. You know, there was a temple there. The temple was full of women, available women. They had alcohol, because they made beer. They had marijuana, because they loved marijuana. They had opium, which they called hul heel, the joy plant. You know, they had, as well as the girls, they had boys. They specifically mention their transgender priestesses. And so, you know, you had something there that was, as far as men were concerned, it was like, what a place! What a place! And you can see why men would stay. They go, oh, well, I'm not moving from here. This is heaven. You know, the place is full of totally drop-dead gorgeous women. I'm high all the time. You know, what's to complain? And you know, it's very interesting when you see that. And you can only really get that when you start to investigate the mythology, you know, and understand what was being done at the time. Anyway, that's the story of Adam and Eve, as expressed by its predecessor, which was the Sumerian tale of Enkidu and Shamhat. By the way, there's no record that I can find of children from this union of Enkidu and Shamhat, which is interesting because remember that Shamhat was between her periods. She just had a period. So she was extremely fertile and she was 15. And she made love for 2 weeks. It's like, yeah, something happened, but we don't know what it was. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.